Hello, this is Don Victor, author of Drawn to Win, host of the podcast Drawn to Win, the director of the Academy of Composition, and the creator of the Core 80 Experience, also known as the See and Grow Rich in Art video course, which you can find out more information at core80.com. This is the Drawn to Win podcast, where I have the incredible privilege to draw artists from around the world into fun and meaningful conversations around art and life, and yes, maybe even a little food. You can hear us each week on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and YouTube. So make sure you subscribe so you always have a seat among friends. Let's get into the show. Sarah, welcome to the show.
Hi, Don.
Oh, hello.
Hi.
So it's early. It's not early morning there, but it's kind of early-ish. What, 10 o'clock, I guess?
Yep, 10-ish.
Cool.
I'm out here in Eugene, Oregon, Pacific time.
Wow. And it's about one-ish here in Pennsylvania. I wish I had a cool name like Eugene, but I don't.
What's the name of the town where you live?
I guess it's Blandon. It may be called Fleetwood.
Blandon doesn't quite have the ring to it, does it?
If it was an R, it could be Brandon, but it isn't. But I guess if I was Asian, I could say Brandon. Yeah, that'd be cool. There's
a town out here on the coast called Bandon, which I totally love because it reminds me of Abandon.
That's awesome. So that it is early, and you were saying that you've been up for a little while. Let's have a conversation about morning routine. That's something I don't think we've ever had in all the podcasts we've done. And so that could be cool.
Yeah, I love hearing about other artists' daily routines. And I think that finding something that works for you and sticking with it is good in all things and in a daily routine if you can manage to find one. I have like several sets of daily routines. Some days are painting days and they'll go one way, and some days are teaching days and they'll go another way. But I always get up pretty early, by 6. Sun comes up at 5 here in the summer. It's so wonderful. And I like to spend some quiet time in the morning, just kind of getting myself in the right mindset for my day. And I run almost every day.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I'm really into that. And I spend some time each morning just sort of checking in with my email, online students, that kind of thing. I can calmly focus first thing and kind of get myself to do things that I have more trouble motivating myself to do in the afternoon, like computer work. It's funny. It's almost like before I'm conscious, I can get myself to tackle the to-do list. But on painting days, I love to be in the studio by 8 a.m. and work for 3 hours, take a break for an hour, get my eyes off of it, and then come back in for several more hours in the afternoon. On a non-painting day or a kind of a hybrid day, I'll paint from about 2 to 5. But I don't get to paint every day, and that's life. Things are always changing.
Yeah. I heard these guys were talking on his podcast the other day, and they said you have to become the master of transition. and so like from your morning routine to go into your studio, and then it's and I like how you have these 3 strategies or plans, that kind of govern your day, and but it's like you said, you want to be in there every day, but you can't because you got other things to do. And then it's kind of like, how do you manage or transition from one thing to another thing? And
definitely. And even within the painting process itself, there are different phases. And I like to break those up sometimes too, because let's say you've only got 2 or 3 hours to paint in a day. And I'm using air quotes, even though you can't see me when I say paint, but it's like, if you're a still life painter, which I am mostly, probably about 95% still life painting the last couple years, there are things around that aren't actually putting the brush on the canvas. So you have your setting up the still life, which can be a real time consuming and mentally taxing process. And
Mm-hmm.
I also like to do a lot of pre-mixing of my paint before I paint.
That's
And
right.
I do value studies also, and preliminary sketches if I'm going to work bigger than, let's say, 12 by 12. So those are all separate phases of painting that are related to painting, but they aren't really painting. And so sometimes I like to do those at different times. So if I only have an hour or something to work, I'll work on setting up still lifes, or I'll do a value sketch so that when I have that dedicated 3 hours in the studio, I can really go in there and paint. I don't have to monkey around with setting up or any of those other kind of studio things that we do.
That's cool. I like that. And when you do the setup, let's say you take one day and you do setup and
Mm-hmm.
prep and that kind of stuff, and then let's say a day or two later you have actually time to go in and paint. In that time in between, because you were setting up and thinking through things, um, does that the time in between, are you thinking about how you're executing it? And if so, then when you do actually go to paint, is that like how does that affect your process, like actually the painting process?
That's a good question. During that interim or the interval, I will be looking at the sketches, maybe on my phone or like on Instagram, and checking in with it in that really small size helps me make a decision. Because, a lot of times, not a lot of times, but sometimes a sketch just won't make it to the painted stage. And I like to have 2 or 3 different still lifes kind of marinating together at
Mm,
once. So around my studio, you'll see 2 or 3 different little stations where objects are hanging out together. And
mhm.
as I walk past the door, maybe I'll go in and move a couple things around, and just sort of see how they get along.
Now,
And
now
yeah.
you walk by, your eye catches the little two items on the table,
Hmm.
and then you say, "Well, let me go move that." Let's talk about that for a second, or a minute, or an hour. I don't care. But but that moment when you're walking by, and then all of a sudden your attention is caught, and you need to now change something.
Hmm.
Um, to me, that's in those moments is the magic of art making, right? It's like something spoke to you, and now you have to go do it. Like
Yeah.
what, like how does that feel when that happens to you, and like what do you do?
So I love it that you refer to it as magic. I refer to it in my own mind as hearing the click.
Mm,
So I'm working with these objects, and a lot of times my paintings will start from something that I see randomly somewhere, maybe on my own kitchen counter, just a color combination or shapes that are nice together. I do a lot of thrifting and antiquing, as you can imagine. I need a lot of stuff to paint, and
hmm.
sometimes, so that's where the idea generation comes from. But then when I start actually combining the objects and looking at them together, different color combinations and things, yeah, you're looking for that kind of magic feeling. And when a still life comes together and gels, it's almost like a actual audible click in
Yeah,
my mind. And I get that also when a painting is finished.
that's
People
I
ask me
like
all the
that.
time, how do you know when a painting is finished? And, there is no answer to that. Don't you love that question?
No.
Well, I have some joking ways that I handle it in workshops when I get it, and I get it fairly frequently. But for me, it's like, when the finish is coming. And this applies to still life setup too. And so you kind of have to tune into that inner voice and start listening for it. And then if you kind of slow down a little bit, you'll hear it. And it's like, done, just done.
Mm,
So yeah, and with still life setup, there's a lot of factors, right? So it's arranging the objects, you got your color combinations. I always say color mixing starts in the setup, for color mixing for your painting anyway.
mhm.
And but then there's vantage point. Am I going to be looking down at this still life? And if you look at my work, you'll see a lot of paintings where there is no horizon line. It's a bird's eye view or almost that.
Mhm.
And I love that, because then that brings the cast shadows into play as real compositional elements. And you'll see that over and over again in my work.
Mm.
Cast shadows and how they affect that, the value structure and the whole composition. So vantage point, is it a eye level view? Is my still life up on a high shelf? A lot of artists have tables that raise and lower for their still lifes. And I kind of do it like the Flintstones method. I stack things up.
Books.
Yeah. Books. I have a couple of sculpture stands just to raise and lower it. And then you got lighting, and changing the lighting on a setup creates a lot of different effects and moods. It really can dramatically affect it. And then you can also change your position relative to the still life. I recommend having an easel that you can move around the space that you paint in. Because sometimes everything is working, and the one thing is where your head is.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So there's a lot of different pieces to juggle when it comes just to still life setup.
It's I remember when I was younger, I had a teacher, and he had a photographer. And she was so frustrated with photography that she just was going to stop. And he's like, no, 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 no. I'm going to teach you how to draw through photography. And so, she went out and she did the first assignment, and I think there was like 9 assignments. And then the first assignment she did it, and she brought it back, and it was just a total mess. She thought it was great, but it was just horrendous. And, and, and so he begins to walk her through these processes of learning how to design and this and that, right, with the camera. And ultimately, she creates these unbelievably gorgeous photos by the end of these 9 lessons.
Wow.
And one of the things is that she would spend hours setting up her still lifes. And she would take like string and like attach it so that things would line up just perfectly and this and that. And there was an art just setting it up, and then, the lighting and everything. And then she would take the photo. But where she probably on her first photo probably didn't take more than 4 minutes, maybe 3 minutes to set the thing up. And probably thinking that the magic was done through the camera itself rather than how she was ordering that still life. And now, as a painter, you have a lot more control because you can move things, shift things, change things.
Yeah. And so through the process of these lessons, she actually started spending more time on the still lifes, you're saying, and that ended up benefiting her photographs in the end.
I mean, I actually have a video out there on it. It's about maybe a 10, 15-minute video where he goes through the slides of her work. And it's just like, what? It's insane.
Yeah, I would love to see that. But you did, going back to the word magic that you mentioned, I like to plan and then let it go. Like you do have to allow a space for that magic to come in. Art is a creative thing, and you don't want to choke that magic out of it, definitely. But for me, if I set myself up carefully, and I do enjoy that stuff, don't get me wrong, lining up everything with a plumb line and string and everything, that doesn't sound like a whole lot of fun to me. But carefully planning so that when I get to the painting part, or the sketching part or whatever it is, I can let myself go and enjoy that process, knowing that I've prepared that, there is still room for magic there, and I need that. And, being open to being surprised. What did Bob Ross call them? Happy accidents? Those are critical too. So I love it. It's this push-pull between control and release.
Yeah, and I think it depends on your personality. For some people, being a little more analytical, like they find great pleasure in that. And then other people, it's like, let's just jump in a car and drive, and we'll figure it out on the way there.
Yeah, I am familiar with both of those types. And that's what's so great. It's like all kinds of minds are attracted to making art. I get to work with students who come to me from professions, architects, graphic designers, medical profession, teachers, just all kinds of minds crave this kind of visual expression and color, and just finding out what each artist is most drawn to about making paintings has been just one of the most fascinating parts of teaching for me, of which there are many. So that's another rabbit hole. But I know you teach also, and it's that kind of human interaction and finding out about people and really getting into their motivations and helping them articulate that. Isn't that just so rewarding?
Yeah, I always heard like people who can't do teach, right? And I
Mm.
think with artists, it's very interesting because um, I think with artists, a lot of them teach because it doesn't matter how great of an artist you are. If you don't figure out how to like tap into a market, you might have to go do something else.
Mm.
And so teaching becomes a great way to kind of still remain within the the flow of things. Plus, the truth is it's an apprenticeship type of experience. You just can't sit down and read a book and learn. I mean, you can learn some things, but you're not going to learn from just reading a book. And
Yeah.
and there's just something about working with someone who's ahead of you in a certain area, and then having them guide you through. And then when you're in there, you want to find people who've been in that space, who are familiar and intimate enough with that space that they're then able to articulate in a way that guides you through that process. And
Yeah, and the idea of mentorship, I think, is really having a resurgence these
yeah,
days. It's a word that you hear getting uh, s- talked about a lot, which I think is really cool. And that apprenticeship thing that you mentioned. Yeah, I really believe that there are a lot of artists out there teaching right now, and students of any kind. And I mean, I still consider myself a student for life,
mhm,
really. And that's what's so wonderful about being an artist. There's never a lack of new things to learn, but you got to find a teacher whose voice you can hear.
mm,
We're all basically saying the same thing in different ways, I think. And finding that key that unlocks the specific door in a student's mind, you got to kind of hit it with all kinds of different things until you find the right pathway in there. But there are only so many ideas
yeah. And
that
I would
we're.
encourage people to find a board of teachers, a board of
Mm,
mentors. I always look at it as like a ladder, and my job is to get you to that next rung. And once you do, maybe that's something I can help you with, but most likely you might have to go to somebody who's skilled in that specific area. Like I'm not going to sit down and teach people how to draw and paint. That's just not my forte.
hmm
Uh, can I defend myself in those arenas? I could, but I'm not going to come out, gladiator champion of Rome. Um, you know, uh, but if it comes down to design and composition, I'll be freaking Caesar at the end of the day.
mm.
And that's where my genius is, and that's where my dedication is. But that's just one aspect, and then you have to at some point develop your drawing skills and your painting skills, and in that you'll find your voice and things like that.
Yeah, and ideally you could work on both of those streams at once, the design and
Absolutely.
composition part and then the drawing and painting part. They are separate and they're both really, there's a lot there. But
The
yeah, it's I think what you
mhm.
said about those who can do and those who can't teach, it seems like everybody is teaching nowadays, and there are artists who just do it for the money, I think, or they have a big enough name that they're getting asked to teach. People really want to learn from them, but
Mhm.
maybe that's not where their heart is, to be with students. Um, and for me, I've gotten so much out of teaching. I've learned so much myself. You know, they say that you never really know what you know until you have to explain it to somebody else.
Yep.
And I would say that I've been teaching for about 6 years now, and
Mm.
in the last 2 or 3 years, I've made fewer paintings than I had in the previous, 5 years before I started teaching. I've made fewer paintings of my own, but they've been better, a
Mm.
lot better, because of what I've learned through
Yeah.
teaching other people what I know. And I have to tell you, I just love teaching. So whether I can or not, or, whatever. I want to do and teach because I love them both.
And it's well, I don't want to go there. I'll just say my drawing teacher years ago, like when he set out, it was funny. He was cursed because he was so focused on what he wanted, which was to be an artist. He even um, he made the decision that he was not going to get married or have kids or anything. He was just going to be dedicated to that, right? And so now he ended up getting married 3 times and having a kid, but because especially as a man, like when you get super focused on like, women are not important to me, all of a sudden women come out of everywhere. And so, he got to travel the world through the military and other things, and spent lots of time in Europe and had shows there. And when he had his kid, and had to come back to the States, I guess she was about 12 years old at the time, he then had to get a job, right? And so he's like, I gotta take care of my kid, right? So he decided to teach. And when he taught, he made the decision. He said, too many teachers want to be an artist and teach at the same time, and they never become really good at both either, right? Now that doesn't mean every teacher, but and so I think the reason why in his earlier life he was great at both was because that was his primary focus, right? And so so it was weird, like he just crated up all his paintings and locked them away. He didn't want to influence his kid, his students and things. I think his artwork was scary because it was like about war and everything. So I'm sure he knew, like, he's gonna have to help some people paint pretty pictures of puppies and flowers, and when they see mutilated bodies and things like that, it's probably just gonna turn them off. So
yeah, it is interesting that some teachers, their students' work ends up looking a lot like theirs in the end.
Yeah,
It doesn't seem to happen with me.
Well, that's
And
good.
it is good, and it isn't my goal. I really do try to meet people where they're at, and that. But Don, it sounds like you are really good at finding just the right teachers and mentors for you at the different places that you've been in your life for the goals that you've wanted to attain.
I would agree with that. And I know that sounds slightly arrogant, but I'll tell you why I'm going to agree fully with that. There are certain things I've learned in my life that I've found a pattern. And the pattern is I end up finding a teacher who has an incredible authority and power in a subject that is often kind of a outlier approach to a topic, be it say money, let's say art, or in my 20s, 30s, spirituality, and so I spent many, many years in the church, but I belonged to a very different type of, the way it was run. It was about really, really empowering every single person in there. And so it was a very, very different experience. Um, and so because of that, every time I need to learn something, I expect nothing less from the universe. I expected that I'm going to find a teacher who has incredible authority, credible power, credible insight into the subject, and it's an outlying approach. Like I expect that to happen. And
yeah, you have that faith in the universe. I have that too. I love that. And far from arrogant, I think I hear a lot of humility in that. You're open-minded to these outlier approaches. You are just open-minded, ready to receive from these teachers, and they come to you. That is how it works when things are flowing. That's awesome.
And I say that not to put myself out there, but to just put out the vibe that if you're looking for a teacher in any discipline or at any level in your life, um, then begin to set like an intensity in yourself on that you won't settle just for, just to say you have a teacher, right?
Mm.
And And if you want greatness, you need to be around great people. You need to be around a great teacher, a great studio,
Mm.
people who are focused on that, who are going to encourage you, who aren't going to put up with your lies and your bullshit and your stories, right? But are going to hold you to greatness, right?
Mm.
Like, and so I'm only saying this with so much intensity because I want you, like, not just you, I'm not talking about you, but like the people listening, to get like demand it. And they say when the student is ready, the teacher appears. And I always look at that as when there's a vibration within inside you, like attracts like. And it's not only that when the student is ready, the teacher appears, it's that the teacher has something to give, you know?
Mm.
And so, yeah.
Yeah, I think we could probably go on about that forever and ever. I feel really grateful in my life. I've had some amazing support and just been able to meet fabulous people. And I've had some good teachers along the way too. It all started when I was a kid. I was really lucky. My parents were totally supportive of me doing art, and they found me a private art teacher from the age of 9 or 10. You know, I was 10 the first time this woman put oil paint in my hands.
Cool.
And I would go to her house. She was, she was a lot like I've grown up to be, really. She had a studio in her home, and I went over to her house once every 2 weeks, I think it was. And I just sat there in her studio with her, and she'd work on her stuff and I'd work on my stuff. And just that experience of being in a working artist studio at that young age and seeing and smelling and feeling what that was like I didn't think of it consciously at the time. But, in the last couple of years, I've had the opportunity to give that back myself. The vast majority of my teaching is adult amateurs, and I adore them. I just adore them. But in the last couple of years, I've had 2 kids come my way, both very talented, both who just want to study oil painting, 12, 13-ish in age, and gotten to have them come to my studio and paint with me for private lessons. And just being able to pay that forward in that way has been very cool, even though teaching children is not my primary teaching focus. But yeah, that's where it began for me. And I still remember the way oil paint smelled, when I got my first set of oil paints, and it still was like turpentine and toxic and just, oh my gosh, just opening up those tubes. And I fell in love right from the beginning.
Wow.
The first thing I ever oil painted was a horse. That teacher I just mentioned, she took me to a farm of a friend of hers and put me down in this stable. I was sitting on the ground and the horse was in the stable, and I don't know, it was her idea that I was going to paint this horse, and she left. And I sat there, and the horse was kind of sniffing me like, what's going on? And, nobody knew it, but the horse wasn't tied. So he just left, he sniffed me, and then he walked away, and I didn't know what to do. So I just sort of sat there and kept making up the painting, I guess. And the teacher came back and just laughed because it was me in an empty barn. It's like getting trampled,
the horse
right?
was still there in your drawing.
Yeah. Right.
That's
my
awesome.
first oil painting.
I love that story. When I was about 9 years old, I remember I went to this new foster home, and they wanted to give me private lessons. And I remember going we went to different artists, and there was this one huge mural artist, and it was cool. Like, he had this warehouse, I believe it was like near a train tracks, right? And he was doing these big murals, and it was cool. And then the person who I actually went and actually took lessons from, I can remember the sound of her house. She had like a certain kind of music, was very clean. Um, was kind of like a soft jazzy type of music to it, right? And she'd always bring out this really cool shaped cup. It was like a cup without a handle. So it was almost like a little bowl. And she'd fill it with like this juice. It was like a pineapple citrus type juice, right? It was like one of those blends, and I loved it. And I remember probably the first real super important lesson that has probably been a foundation, because it was more of an experience. She forced me to paint negative shapes. and it was like a tree. And I wasn't allowed to draw the tree. I had to draw the space. And in drawing the space, the tree appeared, right? And that shift of perspective, I think, has become really the foundation of like everything I teach, which is basically learning how to see into the invisible. And and that was, you know, it was just a cool experience. And so
Yeah, you're bringing back a memory for me also. I
yeah.
know I remember being given that assignment also, and I don't remember where I was, but I was a kid and I was outside under a tree with a pencil and in some kind of class or camp or something. Yeah, same deal. And isn't it so amazing? Maybe is the word synesthesia, how when you're out drawing, sketching in the world, if you're on vacation and you take some photos, you come back home and it's like, oh yeah, my photos, I remember, that was great. You can show them to other people. But if you take a sketchbook and you draw, or if you take your paints and you paint, you'll remember what the air smelled like, what the weather was, what you had
Mm,
for breakfast on that day. It locks it all down. And so these
wow.
powerful memories that we have from childhood, my most powerful memories are connected to art making.
Wow. That's cool. I like that. Synesthesia. Sounds like
That
the
may
name
not
of
be
my
the
future daughter. No, I'm just joking. Uh,
or yeah, or like a band or something. It may
yeah.
not be 100% correct in the use of that word. I think that's when like people experience music as color or something like that.
Oh, wow.
It's a
Neat, neat.
melding of all the forms of perception.
Well, that's what it is. It's like you are present, and you're being absolutely conscious of being present. And where if you're just a hobbyist photographer, obviously a professional artistic photographer probably feels very similar experiences as we
Uh,
do,
Good point.
but for most of us, we see something, we take a picture, we're like, oh, we'll remember that later, right? And you're
Exactly.
more focused on the camera. And I think that's where people get frustrated with like nowadays, where it's like you're living all your experiences through your iPhone. You're there, but you're recording it,
Mhm.
and and you're not really looking at it. You're looking at it through a lens, even though you have the privilege of actually seeing it with your senses. Um,
Yeah, the camera doesn't do it justice. There was a beautiful, heartbreakingly beautiful sunset here last night, and I was driving and I thought I
mm,
should take a picture of that. And then I thought, it will not capture it. It just won't.
no,
And so many people want to paint from photos, and I get that. It's necessary a lot of the time, but there are good reasons to work from life because a camera does change it. It doesn't do what our eyes do. We think we're getting a lot more information than we really are, for one thing, from a photo reference. But that's a whole nother tangent.
yeah,
Going back to talking about education, I want to say one or two more things. I
sure,
think I hear a lot of artists talk about, because in my education, I talked about the beginning with my private lessons, and I painted all through high school. I had a really influential high school art teacher. That is
mm,
such a critical job for those of you out there who are high school art teachers. Like, that is God's work. But I did go to art school. I went to Maryland Institute College of Art, which is
nice,
just a fantastic place. And I was an illustration major, and I
really,
never ended up working. Yeah,
me
I
too.
think that's the
We're the
yeah.
same.
There's a lot of artists out there who are our age who are working representationally and not being commercial illustrators who studied illustration in art school. And I think the reason that is it's one of the few departments left in a traditional art school where drawing and painting realistically is still valued. You could
True.
get a bachelor's, you could get a BFA at MICA making clothing out of recycled materials or doing performance art. But MICA was, at least at the time that I was there, still a school with a strong focus on traditional art making forms. And I talked to a lot of artists who are frustrated with their art school experience. People will say things like, they didn't teach me anything about how to do X, Y, and
Hmm.
Z. And that is not my experience. If I could go back, I would do some things differently. But on the whole, I learned a lot in art school. And there are lots of instances in my teaching today where I'll be telling people how I do something. And they'll say, why do you do it that way? And I'll say, because that's how they told me to do it in Painting 101 in 1997, and I have not changed it since. And that's for everything from the way I lay out my palette to some of the colors
1997.
that I use. We're the 90s. Fantastic. So art school was great. And that's all I got to say about that.
I'm really glad you had that experience.
Mm-hmm.
For the first time in this conversation, I cannot relate to you.
You're one of those artists who didn't get what they were expecting, huh?
I have to cope. I have to consciously cope with the fact that I went to art school. And like, I have to say, well, what was it that I went for? And I have to come up with some spiritualized religious reason for it.
Mm.
Because the truth is, I spent most of my college years focusing on uh, more of a spiritual thing. Even before I went to college, I was just like, all right, God, I'm going to go down south. I'm in Pennsylvania and I'm going to figure you out. I'm going to figure this thing out. Like, we're going to get square here. And
You're going to figure out the God thing? Is that what you thought?
yeah, that's what I was going to do. Because I was like, when it came to the art thing, I was already doing it for almost 15 years, right? And so, when I went to college and I would talk to like my best friend who found out about art as a senior or 11th grade or something, he's like a year or 2 years into it. And it's just a very different experience when you're 15 years into it and you've been winning, at it for so long. That it was a different thing for me. And so I went to college for access to technology, the different environment, um, those things.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I also wanted to get out of the environment that I was in, and it was very important for me to go and spend time seeking out, quote unquote, what this God thing was. And and so yeah, so that's what I did. Now I look back and I'm like, well, maybe I would have learned a lot more if I would have had my focus more on doing the work and this and that. But I'm not 100% certain that would have been the case. And so
Well, I was focused on doing the work, but what I would have done differently is I would have been less attached to illustration as a major and thinking about it as I'm going to have a career from this, and I would have
mhm,
taken more advantage of a wider range of classes. I would have taken printmaking. I would have taken more painting
mm,
classes, more drawing classes. I would have exposed myself to all of what was available to me instead of being so concerned with what do I have to take for my major?
yep.
What are the requirements? Because I got to do this and check all these boxes. It was like, yeah, I would have
If
taken
I
more
if I would
advantage.
go back, I would change my major from illustration to probably industrial design.
That's so
Be-
fascinating.
because that would have given me, I think, a skill set, and it would have been a challenge where I could have then taken my creativity and my design thinking and my in all these different ways and actually put it and hone it into a skill that would have been at least in my way of thinking more um, market friendly, like marketable.
And it
Uh,
would have been fascinating. I think you and I are both interested in this psychological effect of images on the
yes.
viewer, really interested in that. And the industrial design thing, I think that has a lot to do with it. But really, if you had majored in that, you'd be off somewhere right now designing faucets,
Yeah,
not
but I was off
talking to me.
designing, for years off designing, retail ads. So it was the same thing, right? I wasn't really creating images, but I was still designing. And but when looking back at it, I would have looked at industrial design as a three-dimensional version of illustration.
Mm-hmm.
Because for me, illustration is really, and even art, and this is what I teach. It's learning how to actually tap into the psyche of the viewer, coming it from their experience, not just painting what you want to paint or what you feel is nice, but actually what does the muse want to communicate? What is the experience the viewer wants? How do you connect the muse to the viewer? And that's your job, right? That's how I see it. And so it
Mm-hmm.
really has little to do with what you like. You're the medium. It's very much more like being a fortune teller versus something else. At least from the way that I see it and experience it. And so I think industrial design would have been interesting to figure out the same challenges that you do in a painting or an illustration, but just to do it three-dimensionally in a way that with something that people would actually use.
Yeah, and totally, because it's not, and they're experiencing it not just visually, but also they're using it and they're touching it.
Exactly.
Very cool.
And it's interesting because that mentor I was telling you about earlier, who talks about the equinox and stuff. His name is Bill, and we call him our CYO at the academy. He's our chief Yoda officer. He just breaks out with the craziest wisdom things ever, and wise. And one of the things he taught me is that art is an artifact, and because we have this idea that as artists we're actually very closely related to shamans, and that our art actually connects people in a nostalgic way to their past, but in an aspirational way to their future. And when you can get in there and actually trigger feelings and thoughts in a person because of the thing that you created, there becomes, it's not about just capturing the magic that inspires you, but actually how do you continue to capture that moment so that someone else then feels it, right? And if you can, then that thing constantly broadcasts that same, it becomes like this open portal for that muse to continue to speak. And
That's beautiful. It reminds me of something that I say a lot about controlling outcomes. How, we got to paint from an authentic place within us, and whether there's a whole lot of meaning behind it or it's as simple as I really like purple and yellow together. We don't have much control over what our viewer is going to bring to the table when they're looking at our painting. It might trigger a deep-seated memory from childhood, a good one or a bad one. It may remind them of their grandmother or something, who knows, but that's not up to us. We can take them so far by manipulating them visually, doing things like emphasizing the focal point, trying to keep. Okay,
I'm going to push back on you on that one, because that's like the thesis of my life, is that we actually have far, 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 far more control. I mean, you think about a cathedral, it's designed to trigger you into a state of being or state of feeling. It's literally designed to do it. And if you know how to do it, well, then all of a sudden, maybe people feel like they're in the divine. And it's like, no, you're not. It's just the way that your eyes move through this place. If you closed your eyes and you walked into that place, you wouldn't feel the same. So it's something that you're seeing that's now putting you in a state. I mean, when you think of it, when you think of the psychology, you got to think of it from psychology to begin with. Like, for example, if you're talking to a man, right, and you really want to get intimate with him, and I mean on a personal level, not a physical level, then you need to sit side to side with him. Psychologically, that's how you get in. If you sit in front of him, now you're confronting him, and now you're in challenge, fight, and flight mode, right? So where a woman is very different, it's like you got to look her in the eyes, things like that, right? So it's just there's a psychology, a biology to it, and when you get very sensitive and you take time to learn these things. I remember I went and tried to get a job once at this place, and the boss walked me in and he said, sit here, and then he left, right? And so I was going to go sit in the submissive seat, which he put his papers down, and I was going to sit across from him. And I'm like, whoa, no. First of all, we're on the side of the table. That's submissive. And then two, I'm sitting across from him, which is, going just put us in a conflict position. So I'm going to sit on the side. And on the side happened to be at the king's seat at the long table, right? So now I'm side to side, buddy, buddy, but at the same time, I'm also in a position of dominance, right? And I got the job, right? And it was just composing that very, very quick moment to
Mm-hmm.
be in my favor, right?
Mm-hmm. But,
And,
let me ask you this.
sure.
Did putting yourself at the head of the table affect how he was perceiving you, or did it affect how you were feeling about yourself at the time? And then you
Both.
projected more self-confidence, and so you got
Both.
the job.
Both.
Well, that's awesome.
Yeah. And that's, yeah.
I like what you said about cathedrals. That resonated with me, and I definitely agree with it. That's a really good point. Yeah. Maybe I was talking more about whether someone's going to quote unquote like your painting or not, what their response to it is on that.
They might not um like it because it just may not be their taste, right? It may not be their style, but it doesn't mean that they can't feel what you put into it. And and we do this all the time. Like when I work with a student, I actually have them write down in one sentence what is the outcome that you want from this painting before we draw anything. And the most important question at the academy that we ask is how does this support your story? You want to make value decisions, color decision, line decisions, space decisions,
Mhm. Mhm.
even the frame that you put it in. How does it support your story? And we drill that into and what's crazy, it happens all the time. When the person is done, they show someone who doesn't know anything about the work that went in. And within about 80%, that people will almost speak word for word what the artist wrote down on the paper before they drew one line.
That is so cool.
Yeah, and so that's why I'm adamant about it, because for 3 years I've seen it happen over and over and over and over and over again, and it's cool. Like when the artist experiences it for the first time, someone comes on, they're like, "Oh yeah, I feel like there's a spirit moving through here." Well, I wanted a spirit, the feeling of a spirit moving through here, or whatever, right? And it's like, and their eyes get all big, like, "Oh my!" I remember I was working with one of my students, and she was doing this Indian. She was Indian, and she was doing an illustration for this magazine. And so I said, Ivy, what we're going to do is we're going to compose it with inside of a square, because you have to remember that they're putting a magazine together, which is in a square format, right? And so you're going to force their hand to do something, because they're going to have to figure out, do I just make this into a spot illustration? But if we design it right, they won't want it to be a spot. They want to blow it up. And if they blow it up, they're going to have a problem. They got to fill this big white gap space at the bottom of the
Mhm.
page. And that's where they get to write an article about you, right? And that's exactly what they did,
Talk
right?
about calling it forth from the universe, what you want to have happen. And that happened. That's wonderful.
Yeah, so she pushed it, but then the illustration itself, it was designed to trigger two emotions, and everyone got it. They felt it, and they were just like, "What? Like, why does this?" Now her drawing skills and her coloring skills and things, those things need to be improved. So go take a good painting workshop or maybe a drawing workshop, but
Yeah,
she
she
can
can come to me.
communicate. Yeah, exactly. So she ain't coming to me for it. So I'll send her over to you.
Yeah, and it's so interesting when I start working with people, I like to ask them what their goals are. And everybody says, I want my paintings to get better. And then I say, okay, well, what does that look like?
Mm-hmm.
What are the areas that you want to improve on? And a lot of people will say, I want to loosen up my brushwork, or people will say, I want my colors to be more vibrant. They all kinds of things. And I like to suggest to them that maybe the first improvement that's going to happen isn't going to be visible in the painting itself, but it's going to be in how you feel when you're making it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, because you'll have more confidence. You'll have an easier time getting yourself to the easel. You'll be more excited about what you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe you'll have more access to the flow state when you get there.
The flow state.
Don't you love it?
So how do you? What we're talking about is about. I always call it inspiration, which comes from two words meaning in spirit. And so how do you get in the spirit that you're needing um, to produce? Like for your case, like what do you do to keep yourself inspired, like to be in that flow state, as you call it?
Yeah, I don't have a big problem with burnout, partly because of those various routines that we mentioned earlier. I think if I was just painting for 8 to 10 hours a day, all day, every day, I would get burned out.
Mm,
And also, if I was really thinking of it from like a money making perspective, like I got to make the paintings so I can pay the rent.
yep.
It just doesn't work that way for me. It's like anytime I approach making a piece of art from the standpoint of this is going to sell and I am going to get money from it, it never ever works. So it is pointless for me to even go there. But as far as staying inspired, when I need a break, I take one, and there's always something else to do. I can put together a proposal for a new workshop. I can work with my online students. I don't do a lot of different kinds of art. I tell people I'm a one-trick pony all the time because really all I do is oil paint and then I draw in pencil sometimes. But within that, there's so much. If I just don't feel like painting still life, then I'll go to an open studio and paint a figure. Or I will invite a friend over and have them sit for me for a portrait for 2 or 3 hours. Or God forbid, I might even go out and do some plein air landscape painting. So there's just, I don't know. I'm never
But when
bored.
you
I
do it,
don't feel like I work a day in my life. I'm
that's
extremely
awesome.
grateful. I'm just so lucky. So, as far as burnout and motivation, it's not such an issue. What I mean by the flow state though is like, when you're painting and things are it feels like pushing a rock uphill. But then there are those days when they're just rock star moments,
Mhm.
everything's working. You feel like it paints itself. So you have to have the bad days or you wouldn't appreciate the good days. And the more you paint, the more bad days you're going to have statistically. So having bad days is kind of a good thing, really, when you look at it that way.
Indeed.
But it's like getting into that place where you'll have enough sustained focus to really lose track of time, to really get outside of yourself. That's the flow state. And if I knew how to tell you how to get there every time you went in the studio, I don't know. I wish I knew.
I was reading this. Was I reading? No, it was a podcast, and they were talking about a book. And the lady came on. She was some neuroscientist or whatever, and she was talking about creativity and how they're figuring out ways to actually trick yourself into stimulating creativity.
Mm-hmm.
And because we all like those moments where you can't shut it off. You're doing the dishes or you're taking a shower. Maybe you're out on a walk. A lot of artists would go for a walk.
Mm-hmm.
And what happens is when you're in a repetitive motion, this is why like maybe working out becomes effective.
Running for me, for sure.
Running, exactly. You're in this repetitive motion that doesn't require very much thought, but just enough to keep your brain active at a very low level. And it's repetitive, so it kind of just goes off. But by stimulating the mind enough through movement, it then all of a sudden like opens you up and you start connecting, getting all these connections. Um,
Yeah, I
Bill,
do definitely experience that.
so when you go for a run, at the end of the run, do you have like this focus for like maybe the next 3 to 5 hours? Like this, I know I'm going to do this, or like
Mm,
how do you feel when you're done with the run?
Well, relaxed and ready for the day for sure. But the ideas that come to me when I'm running, sometimes it's about paintings, but that usually happens to me just sort of randomly on the fly. If I
Mm,
stay in awareness as I'm going through my daily life, I
mhm.
will just see things everywhere that give me ideas for paintings. But running, it's more like creative ideas around life, teaching, work,
Yep.
ideas for lesson plans, or who should I email, or oh, this is a really good idea for like someone I could reach out to or something I could do in the future.
Mm,
Those kind of connections tend to happen a lot.
that's interesting.
My paintings don't come from this is necessarily like ideas. Like I don't see my paintings in my mind fully formed before I make them. I sort of have to create them with my hands and then I make them.
So would you say that in the running, um, the clarity that comes to you is often much more of energy that needs to go out from you to do something, for example, to connect with somebody, to create a proposal, to ultimately it's about connecting with things outside of yourself. And
Hmm.
the art, those ideas are much more like whispers that come to you that need time to be, you sit down with a cup of tea and you kind of spend time with them. Does that make
Yeah,
sense?
just quietly keying into your
Yeah.
inner kind of awareness. Yeah,
Hmm.
I would. I would.
That's interesting.
It
Now,
is all interesting.
here's a strange technique that we'll throw out to people. It's something I've been doing for maybe about 2 months, and I learned it maybe about 5 months ago, but I've just been terrified to do it, and now I do it frequently, um, because I've given into it, and I just like the results that come out of it. The creative power that comes out of it is just intense, um, and that is what is wonderfully coined releasing the rage.
Hmm.
And you basically like go in your basement, if you're driving in a car, like when something triggers you or pisses you off or upsets you or just rubs you the wrong way or whatever, we're trained to be so polite and just push it down or put it away. And um and I'm not someone who likes conflict. So I wasn't attracted to this method, but what I'm doing now is allowing myself a couple minutes, wrongly or rightly, just to express um, with incredible amounts of intensity
Hmm.
how that's not cool. And a lot of times it's to myself about myself, you know.
Hmm.
Um, so like the other day, I had a job and I got fired from it, right?
I'm sorry.
Yeah, and but I wasn't even there for a week, and and I'm looking at the guy and I'm like, okay, like what are you gonna get to do, right? So I was like, all right, and and then I was like, so I got home, I was like, okay, I guess I need to kind of do my resume or whatever, and and I'm like, dude, you're doing it again. You're gonna spend 3 days making your resume pretty and not getting in front of people, right? Like you just need to call people. No, 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 I got to do the. And then I got pissed at myself, right? And I released the rage. And what happens is like it just fires your synapses up, and then about 15 minutes after the rage is released, you get this sense of peace that comes over you and this incredible clarity.
Hmm.
And so I just started calling people, and I called this college, and they're like, "Send us your resume," right? And I said, "Well, let me." And I was, and then I released a rage inside myself, and I was like, "I'm not going to let this person tell me to send a resume, and they're going to throw it in. No way." So then I asked her. I said, "So, is there a course that your community is so hungry for, but the college hasn't yet figured out exactly how to deliver it?" And she says, "Well, there is this one program they've been asking for. And we haven't been able to figure it out. It's called design thinking." And I'm like,
Hmm.
well, I know somebody who can help you with that. And so I did it again the next morning, and I got this incredible clarity where I started calling foster care agencies because I was raised in foster care. And I got in touch with one, and we end up closing this incredible deal for this summer course that I'm going to be working with these foster kids with, right? Taking them
Wow.
to the museum and all. But it all came out of getting up early in the morning. Uh, I get up at 4:30 in the morning, right? And I do my workout, and then I been incorporating like this releasing the rage, and then like the clarity that comes 10, 15 minutes afterwards, I just write. And I
Huh.
go through this like 2.5, 3 hour ritual every morning where I have like 3 sets of workouts, and then I have 3 sets of times where I write, and it just sets my entire day. And
Hmm.
it's like 7:30, and I'm ready to get rocking and rolling.
Yeah,
And
it sounds awesome.
yeah, and so it's I'm just so stoked that we'll be able to give back, like you were saying with the kids that are coming in your circle. So that's just an interesting technique.
Yeah, so creative ideas that aren't necessarily related to art. We need them in all aspects of our lives, don't we?
Indeed, indeed.
Yeah, you got to hack yourself.
Exactly.
You're
I
getting up at
like
4
that.
in the morning and hacking yourself. I think I get a lot of opportunities to try to help people get themselves to do the thing that they most want to do.
That's
There's so
cool.
much resistance and there's so much fear. I experienced it myself for so
Hmm.
many years. When I got out of art school, I kind of hit this wall of not knowing how to get going with my life or my art or anything. I got some bad ideas in art school, like to be important, a painting had to be really, really big and contain multiple nude figures, maybe a biblical narrative or something. And I didn't know how to approach a gallery. And I was so daunted that I stalled out and I could do nothing. I was
Hmm.
totally in fear. And it took me years to get back into painting, which I did eventually do about 11 years ago. And I'm so grateful that that happened, but
Mm.
I get a lot of opportunities nowadays to tell people, no, you don't have to shop and clean out your garage today. I give you permission to paint. It's like we want to do this thing more than anything else. We want to paint, make art, create whatever it is that we want to do, but we let the things of life get in the way. Productive procrastination, the to-do list. And so we got to find a way to hack ourselves to get
Yes.
ourselves to do the thing that we want to do when life is crowding in. And I've come up with lots of good ways to do that for myself. But everybody's different. You got to find your own motivation. What gets you there, and try lots of things.
Wow, you just gave me a great idea for a book, a collaboration from different artists, and they all contribute maybe like 3 hacks, like life
Ah,
hacks.
all
Like,
right. Well, sign me up. Give me a
all right,
chapter.
cool. I'm writing that puppy down. Give me 1 second. Uh, the artist life hack guide. um, that's cool. 90 days.
Everybody is motivated in different ways. Some people, it's really a reward system. It's like, well, if I paint for 3 hours, then I can have an ice cream sundae. And some people are really motivated by positive feedback. Where can we get that? Oh, how about Instagram? So I'll encourage
Mm.
some people to set up an Instagram account and start posting. And some people are motivated by money, let's face it.
Mm-hmm.
So figuring out a way to sell paintings or, that. But it's like we got to break down the barriers to doing what we want to do. And the biggest barrier is fear. Like I said, and I went through that and I didn't paint for so many years and it sucked the life out of me. And I've been painting a lot just in this current iteration of my life for about 11 years now, 10 years, 11 years. My
Mm.
blog just turned 10 in February. What a
Oh,
milestone. But
wow.
I
It's like
do
a little
feel like
birthday party.
it was. I gave away a painting on Instagram.
Oh,
I'm
wow.
I'm all about Instagram. God, it's just so fun. Um, I did. I just actually shipped that painting off. Somebody in South Africa won it. So how cool is that?
Nice, nice.
Yeah. So what was I saying? Uh, just sorry. Totally stalled. Wrench in the gears. I started thinking about Instagram, and I got all meh. Um,
You were saying about 11 years ago you started painting.
Yeah, and let's see. I'm just so grateful that I was able to get back into it. Here's where I was going with that. But I do feel that since it's only been about 10 years since I was in that total fear place, I can relate to students who are just beginning. People
Mm.
who don't know what they're doing and they're struggling with certain aspects in their paintings, and I remember exactly what that felt like. I've had
Mm.
some big breakthroughs that have made me really excited personally, but only in the last few years. My early paintings are pretty terrible. And if you actually go on my blog, you can go back in time 10 years and see the first painting I posted. It's extremely mediocre. I get it. Like I still remember vividly in my hands, in my muscle memory, what it feels like to struggle with these problems that I get to help students with on a daily basis now. And I love my job. And I love painting too. I'm never going to get tired of it. Color theory, paint application. I'm working bigger and bigger. And so big for me right now is like, oh my God, a 16 by 20. Stop the presses. Sarah is working big. When I first started doing daily painting 10 years ago, I did daily painting for a couple of years when I first got back into painting. And it was a revelation to me, just getting out of that preciousness. Every painting doesn't have to be a huge investment of time and materials and my soul. It can just be today, and tomorrow is a new day, and nobody ever has to see it if I don't want them to. But I do put everything out there because I just love it. Love the feedback, love the interaction and the networking that happens. But so
beautiful.
Getting away from being precious in that way was super valuable to me when I discovered it through daily painting. But over time, I did start working bigger. So I was like 5x7s and 6x6s back then. I even did a couple of 3x3s, which is just insane. And over time, I got bigger and bigger. And now my comfort zone is like 10x10 inches, 12x12 inches. All my paintings are oil on canvas. I love stretch canvas. I don't paint on panels anymore, but I used to. And, I think that by the time I'm in my 60s, I'm going to be super comfortable painting an 18x24. And that's just going to be where it's at. But for now, I'm still really a small painter. So I do get to begin and end a painting in one day if I want to. Usually I stretch it out over 2 or 3 days, but it's always consecutive days while the paint's still wet, because I am an alla prima technique painter. Wet on wet, direct painting, start and finish while it's still, because if I work back into a dry painting, I will repaint the whole thing anyway. So I might as well start another one or whatever, and then I'll have 2 paintings.
That's cool.
Yeah.
In your journey, where was a time that there was something you were afraid of and you just needed permission to not be afraid of it anymore? Can you think of a time where you can see that dramatic, that dark to light, that, as you said earlier, purple to yellow contrast, where at one point you were standing in fear because you weren't you were maybe concerned you weren't good enough, or that if you stepped out you would get hurt, and you got the permission. Maybe it was something from within yourself or someone else gave you the permission, but then you stepped forward and felt that difference. Can you think of a time in your life where that happened?
I wish I had like a burning bush moment to share with you. I have a lot of little experiences like that have accrued over time. Subject matter in paintings is one place that's happened for me. It happened a lot in the beginning. I would see other artists out there painting things like onions or a certain kind of flower, or like cherries on a branch with leaves. And I would think, oh my gosh, I never thought of doing that. And that looks hard. and so I would not try these things. But then when I would try them, like onions is a great example for me. It looked so hard, but it looked so amazing when other artists did it. When I finally got up the courage to try it myself, it was easy. I was surprised. I surprised myself. On the other hand, there are certain subjects that should be ridiculously easy that I absolutely can't handle. And my students right now are all out there screaming, "It's tomatoes, we know." Like, I can't paint a tomato.
Is that an apple?
No, exactly. An apple I can do. A tomato, not to save my life. But anyway, now you're gonna be, I know you're Googling right now, Sarah Sedwick tomato painting. There's some really bad ones out there. But so there's that. But then also with my online mentorship program, which I've been doing for 2 years, I did not see that coming. And I'll tell you, it was not my idea at all. I was teaching in-person workshops. I was happy as a clam. And that's how I thought I was going to do it. It was like, I'm going to make paintings. I'm going to teach these workshops. This is my deal. So that was my plan. And anytime something is my plan, quote unquote, I should just get ready to have it totally thrown out with the bathwater, because God's going to come in and say, no, we're going over here. And that's what happened. One of my workshop students approached me and asked me if I would mentor her online. And I said yes. I knew other artists were out there doing online teaching, and I thought, nah, that's not for me. I don't know how that would work anyway. I discounted it. It was crazy. And I said yes to this student because she's very dear to my heart, and we started working together. And then more people came. And now I have to tell you, it's this like most fulfilling part of my career that I never saw coming. And I don't consider that it was my idea in any way. So it's
That's
not
beautiful.
necessarily an example of fear, but it is an example of grace working in my life. Just when you are open to the universe and you say yes, amazing things happen. That's the story of my life right there.
That's beautiful. It's gorgeous.
Thank you, Don. So when are we going to talk about food?
We're not there yet.
Oh my gosh, it's almost lunchtime for me now, though.
Well, you're in your kitchen, right? Go get some food. Well, since you want to go there, let's go there.
If you got more art questions, you are more than welcome.
I'm enjoying this, and
me too.
But maybe we'll have to do a round 2.
I would love it.
And so let's get into some food.
Okay.
What do you like to eat? What are you going to eat for lunch today? Let me ask you that. What are you going to eat for lunch today?
Let's see. I'm probably going to have a protein shake full of vegetables for lunch today because I love that.
Nice. What kind of veggies?
Beets, carrots, cucumber, maybe some blueberries.
It's going to be a darky red one, huh?
Oh, it's going to be delicious. Spinach.
Nice.
Yeah, I'm a little bit of a health food nut, but I love to eat. Sushi is my favorite food, and it has been my whole life.
Wow, nice.
But I love Asian food, and lately I've been eating just a ton of noodles. Rice noodle soup, was it pho, whatever that is, Vietnamese noodle soup. There's a Cambodian place that I just love in Eugene where they make this rice noodle soup that I'm obsessed with, and I have to eat it once a week or I just, freak out. So if you want to know what this place is, hit me up and I'll share it. But yeah, that's what I like to eat. And I like to cook too. I've gone through different phases of my life where I've cooked a lot and been really into reading cookbooks. I'm not in one of those phases right now, though. I'm mostly a blender addict these days at home. I totally
feel you on that. I like to blend a shake and I blend it at night and I put it in the refrigerator, right? And so it sits. I don't know.
Let the flavors blend.
Well, yeah. What happens is what I do is I use the orange juice and some mixed berries, right? And now I prefer like a green shake, but for my first shake, I'll usually make it red. And but what I notice is that it separates, so it's all juice at the bottom, and then the pulp of the fruit goes to the top. And so first thing in the morning, I grab a spoon and I just eat that top part. Ooh. And then I drink it down, right? And it's just a cool experience. And it tastes good. And so I enjoy a nice shake, and I love green smoothies with spinach and I was doing spinach and some fruits and things, and then one day I had a bag of broccoli, and I'm like, well, let's try it. So I put some spinach in there, broccoli, and some orange juice. And the secret is the orange juice. It gives it this nice creamy texture and taste. And I tried peas and green beans. All of it just tastes delicious.
Yeah, and I'm laughing so hard because I have a dear friend who is all about putting broccoli in the blender. And I haven't done it yet, but I am not closed-minded. I just haven't gotten around to it.
Mm-hmm.
My dad really likes to mix orange juice and peanut butter and chocolate protein powder. And he swears by this. It's something about like the orange juice, peanut butter, milk. There's milk in there too. I don't know. I can't do orange juice and milk. I'm not that big of a fan of orange juice or oranges in general, but I like to paint them. So I always have them around. And that reminds me, the young student that I mentioned who comes over to my house, she'll look in my kitchen and I will just have a ton of fruit on the counter. And it's mostly shrapnel from still life workshops because I buy all these apples and things to take to my workshops, and I set up these big colorful still lifes and I bring it all home and I have like 10 apples of 3 different colors on the counter. And she goes, do you eat all that stuff or is it just for painting? So
nice.
Oranges I don't usually eat, but the apples I do. I love them.
I am obsessed with oranges right now.
Hmm.
And for many, 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 many years, every time I got orange juice, I'd have to run to the bathroom. And so it was so frustrating. And then I went to Portugal and I spent 5 months in Portugal. And everywhere you went, they had these big, freshly squeezed orange juice machines, right? And they just pour oranges in the top and so you get like not just a little juice glass, but like a big glass of freshly squeezed orange juice for like $1, right?
Yum.
And I tried it and I didn't have to run off to the bathroom. And so I would drink that probably 3, 4 times a week and never got sick. And so I don't know if just there was a lot of processed chemicals in the orange juice that we have here. Um, but it healed me. And I've never had the problem since.
Wow.
And I remember where I was staying in this little town called Oliveles, and it was on the apartment was on the second floor. And one day I walked outside and there's a tree that's right in front of the property, and I got punched in the face with the most incredible smelling floral bouquet ever. And it was this orange tree because we were above the tree and it bloomed. And oh my God, it was incredible. And so from my time in Portugal, I just fell in love with oranges. So,
Hmm.
yeah.
That's very cool. I love to paint them.
You paint them, I'll drink them. Fair enough?
Absolutely. Maybe I'll send a box your way when I'm done with the next round.
All right. Well, next time we'll get into some like food with substance.
Okay, I'll tell you what I like to cook. Maybe
All
I'll
right.
share a recipe. I would love to do this again. This was a lot of fun, Don.
This is cool. We'll go ahead and set up another time it was.
Okay, well, before we get off,
Oh
I
yeah.
just want to say anyone that's interested in seeing more of my work, please visit my website, sarahsedwick.com, or my Instagram. I'm at Sedwick Studio. I would love to connect with you. Thanks for listening.
In just 30 days, the Core 80 experience teaches you to decode the intentional design underneath great masterpieces. Through video lessons, assignments, and feedback, you learn to recognize the underlining structures like thrust maps, echoes, and gamuts that give master compositions substance and gravitas. Knowing how master artists and illustrators compose their artwork unlocks your ability to give your artwork more meaning and energy. Enroll today and get a 7-day no-hassle money-back guarantee at core80.com.